Welcome to Warriors at Work. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. Warriors at Work is a place where everyone in the workplace can come together, gain insight, encouragement, tell stories, connect, and share wisdom. We are a place of like-minded people at different stages of life, all coming together with a shared interest of enlightening and inspiring one another. If you're interested in going from the predictable to the potent, and you want to find your warrior magic, step into the journey with us. Welcome to Warriors at Work. Today, this is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. I am so thrilled to bring this conversation to you today. I am joined by my esteemed colleague and dear friend, Amy Gonzales. Now, Amy and I have known each other for the better part of 8 years and have worked together in literally dozens of companies in various countries, by the way, too. And I learn every single time I am with her. Amy's been doing this work for the better part of 20 years all over the world. I affectionately call her the presence whisperer. She has this incredible ability to pick up the subtle little things that are going on underneath the surface that make somebody extraordinary. And I am so thrilled to have you here live and in person, Amy Gonzales. So thank you so much for being here today.
Jeannie, I am excited to be here too. Thank you so much for asking me.
So what I thought would be kind of fun, being that we both do this work on our own and together, it would be kind of fun to go back and forth in all of our thoughts and opinions and wisdom around the subject of presence. It's sort of a nebulous concept, and there's such a demand for people to either understand more about it or bring some of it into their way of being in their roles. And there's just so many questions around the subject. So what I thought we could do is first start with, how the heck did you find your way into this work? Why was it meaningful for you?
Well, why was it meaningful? It was meaningful, I think, for a couple of reasons. The first being that I think for all of us, we're drawn to what we want to work on. And I know, Jeannie, you have your own stories around this that you should share as well. But for me, I ended up getting promoted pretty quickly in my career. And I was at a director level before I was 30. And I'm also from New York originally. And so what it meant is that I felt like I spent the first half of my career trying to prove that I was good and competent. And I would get really, struggle with always showing up powerful and strong. And you have to remember that back in the late 80s, there was still a lot of work that was about teaching women to be powerful. And that's where I really started. I started this conversation with, we need to teach women how to be stronger so they can be taken seriously. And yet I started to recognize that there was something about that formula that was a missing link, that being powerful was good, but not if you couldn't show up in such a way that you were able to engage people authentically or just have people trust you quickly. So there was this whole notion of really having to be my best formal self as opposed to my most relaxed, confident self. Second piece of that, then, the sort of life-changing piece is working with a woman who I still love and adore to this day, Pat Kirkland. And Pat and I had crossed paths a gazillion years ago in a company, and I'd asked her to collaborate with me on some work that I was doing for women. And she started to dig into this topic of power and was one of the first, this was way before Amy Cuddy's work, to really start to look at this notion of there is what she started calling then a likability factor. And what it really is, it's not about being liked, it's about being able to establish rapport and being able to establish connection quickly. And she kept pushing me on this notion that it's not just about being strong, it's also about being warm. And I really bristled for a long time. I think the New Yorker in me bristled about, you got to be strong. What's this thing about being likable? Until I realized, there's some funny stories that I won't go into now, sort of accidentally, the strength of when you are simply you being your most relaxed self and more focused on being engaged with your audience, that you show up in a really different way. So Pat really influenced this conversation, and I think this whole field of work. And it is something then that over the last 15 years, I've played with it with Pat. I've done some coaching, as you know, on my own. And the notion of executive presence has become something that's everywhere in companies. It's everywhere in conversations, because people recognize how powerful it is and how practical it is.
It is such a differential. And I just want to connect on a couple of things you just said. So you used the word authenticity early on. And, I got into this work out of my own pain, and frankly, how monumentally poor I was at it, and how I was overly focused on execution and driving for results that I missed so many of the nuances of the rapport and the connection, and how important it was not only as an individual contributor, but even more critically as a leader, and as you were taking on more and more responsibility. And I just missed it. And it was just after a lot of embarrassing moments, bad feedback, that I realized that there's so much more here. And, fast forward to a number of years later, it's really tuning into, what does my best self look and sound like? And if I know what it is and I know what it looks like, I'll have so much more access to it. So it's like bringing consciousness to it. And there's so much power to bringing consciousness to it. And funny, before we got on this call, I thought, I'm kind of curious how much is out there in terms of the word presence or executive presence. And there was 204 million results on the subject of executive presence, the amount of articles and best practices, and they all revolve around a lot of the behaviors that we're going to talk about in our conversation, which leads me to my next question is, how do you define the characteristics of someone who has that thing we call presence?
That it factor. Well, the easiest way that I really focus on this is, how do you, as consistently, and I'm going to use that word consistency a lot, how do you consistently show up when the stakes are high, when the pressure is high, or simply when your influence opportunities are high, in such a way that you are able to be seen and heard as credible, as compelling, as persuasive, and as engaging. So I'm going to take it as a step back, Jeannie, because I know you're going to talk to me about this whole notion of why it matters. So there's really two competing elements on this. There is, to break it down really simply for anybody who's listening to this, there's an element around leadership presence that has to do with, how do I show that I'm capable? How do I show that I'm credible? How do I show that I'm strong? And we talk about that as a set of competence behaviors. How do I demonstrate that I'm competent? That what you talked about, driving for results, executing, being able to deliver. On the other side of that, and this is where you and I probably both came to this work and struggled, is around how important it is equally to build connection and build engagement. So the other side of the presence it formula is this engagement and connection piece. And that is huge, because it's about, do I trust you? Do I think you have my best interest at heart as well? Am I willing to be influenced by you? So in this dynamic between, how do I show up with competence behaviors, and equally important, how do I naturally connect and engage with others so that they recognize me at a very human level as friend, not foe?
Yeah, there's such a key piece to this, is the recognition that we are primal beings. We have very, very quickly can size someone up, whether friend, foe, prey, or predator.
Yep.
And then we'll also make quick judgments on, why do I care what you're saying? So if you're balancing both, you have a greater chance of engaging me and allowing for me to follow what you're saying.
Completely.
Do you think it differs at all for men to women?
The interesting thing about that, Jeannie, is that the behaviors don't differ. And we coach a lot of men and we coach a lot of women. The behaviors, and incidentally, culturally, we'll talk about this too, around the world, the behaviors, these are meta behaviors, so they go under culture, they go under gender. The difference, though, is that women, as they're moving up, have what's known as a narrower band of acceptable behaviors, display behaviors, that they can show that are seen as effective. So in one sense, it's almost as if we have the bumper guards that show us to course correct, show up earlier for women. So you can look at politics. Women who show up as very strong are really accused of being more arrogant or condescending or unapproachable much faster than their male colleagues. And so that course correction happens earlier. Same thing if you go too far on what we'll call the connection or the engagement side, it can be seen as weak or ineffective or girly or any of those pejorative adjectives come across much sooner for women. Now, what's really cool about this balance between them both is it starts to outwit the unconscious bias that people have. And I want to go just 1 second deeper into this because you talked about the primal being piece of this, Jeannie, which you and I have talked about this a lot. We're really wired from an evolutionary leadership theory to seek out leaders. Our brain looks for patterns of what looks like a leader to us. And in that very, very dark recesses of the brain, the limbic system, you go on back, we recognize basically it's about who is strong, who can provide for us, who can get us resources. So we have this check mark that says, ooh, are they strong? Do they look like a leader? Can they get us resources? Can they protect us? At the same time, we also sort of survival of the species, we look for people that we recognize instinctively have our best interest at heart, are going to look out for us and not just themselves. And so this whole thing about being able to show up both strong and warm, it is the same set of skills or behaviors for men and women. Women just get frustrated because it feels like they get course corrected sooner. What I will say to every time I coach women around this, I go, the good news for you is that you get feedback faster. You get feedback faster about when you're doing things that are getting in the way of your best presence coming through. So that the truth is the band itself, when you're at your best, it's easy, it's natural. There's almost just a ease or energy that comes out when you're showing up as your best self. And when you're there, you're doing everything you need to do. And so as you move up within the organization, recognizing that this isn't about changing who you are, this is about being consistent about showing up with these sort of balance of mindsets or skills or behaviors so that you are always in the place of being able to be both strong, capable, and engaging, build trust.
You talked about earlier, a lot of what we're doing in the coaching is we're playing in the high stakes zones. We're playing in those spaces where you might get thrown off your game, or you might show up as, using the word aggressive or arrogant or whatever it is. This is for men and women. And I feel like that is such a key element to the difference to this. It's like we're not just talking about the behaviors, because we could make this an intellectual exercise where everyone listening takes copious notes and everybody walks away, and the same would be true with any kind of workshops. But there's something very different when you break it down to say, let's try it on. Let's not just talk about it. Let's see what you're doing and how you're doing it when we're putting you into those higher stakes situations. And that to me is sort of the power of this work, because we can very quickly help you identify, wow, those are really strong anchor behaviors. Let's bring that as often as possible. And let's understand where's the noise? What's the stuff that's taking away from your best self? And I don't think I've ever asked you this question. So when you're sitting before someone and they're about to take you through a particularly challenging situation, when you click over to that coaching lens, what are the things that you're looking for in terms of identifying a need? Like what naturally comes up for you?
Well, First of all, what you said about this work is that it's just, I think why people respond to it is they know it's important, but they also realize when we start working with them and coaching them is how practical this is. It's just, you're right, it's not theoretical. It's hugely practical, and it shows up everywhere with everyone. So what I start to look for first is when you look at this notion, we all have a tendency under stress or pressure to overcorrect to either showing up with too much competence and therefore perhaps creating some level of barrier between you and others. So you're strong, but I don't like you. I don't want to be influenced by you. Or you tend to lean too much on connection and engagement, which is you're lovely, but I don't have to pay attention to anything you say. So the first thing I tend to look at is, where do you lean? Do you lean more on a set of competence behaviors, or do you lean more on a set of connection behaviors? Because the trick about this, and this is something that you and I have talked about a lot, the trick is that people don't know what to do with it. So let me give you, I want people to keep whatever their natural strength is, whether it's competence or whether it is connection. Keep that. So this is about being able to say, here's the things that are working. Here's what you naturally go to. So I want you to keep all that. And then we want, so A, what's working for you? Then B, what is it that we need to do to balance you out? So let me give you an example. Yesterday, I was down in beautiful Monterey working with a group of finance people. And one of the women said, I know I work too much on the connection side. I tend to really just want people to like me, which is a lovely thing. And I will always say, for those of you who are listening, if you generally move toward more relationship and connection, that's powerful, because it's harder to teach people to be authentically interested and engaged in others.
So true.
Right? So I said, that's great. So let me hear you. You're trying to do something. So she started, and like a lot of people, this is how her voice sounded. I'm so-and-so, so-and-so, and my business priorities are, I really want to work on blah, 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 blah. So there was all this upward inflection going on. So but at the same time, she had a lovely smile. There was warmth. There was great, authentic. You could feel her energy in terms of truly being interested in the clients that she was supporting. But why people weren't listening to her is because everything she said sounded tentative or questioning. And so with that person, it's then about being able to say really quickly, all right, you need to make sure that you are showing up with all that natural warmth. And the only thing you need to change, first thing you need to change is just put a period at the end of every sentence versus a question mark or a comma. So, whoever we're working with, we look for A, what's your natural strength? And then B, if you're too much on the competence, what's the 1 or 2 connection cues you need? And if you're too much on connection, keep it. What are the 1 or 2 competence cues you need? The trick, I'll say one more thing, Jeannie, because I want your perspective on this too. I think where people get frustrated is they swing back and forth, and they've received feedback and they don't know what to do with it, so they overcorrect. And I never forget, I think you might have been with me when we were working with a client in Chicago, and there was a woman who was sitting there who has one of those very, very serious faces, very serious face. And I had her come on up. And the minute she came on up to the front of the room, she went from having this very serious, almost arrogant, condescending look where and the face, if you're looking at it and you don't know, it looks
scary.
Judgmental. Scary, right? A scary face. And the minute she got up, her head tilted, and she did this big over-exaggerate and this smile and this little wave and said, hi. And I went, wait a minute, what the heck? And I had to stop her. She couldn't even get her name out. And I said, have you had a lot of feedback that you look very serious? And she turned to me and said, since I was in 2nd grade, people have been telling me to smile. And it's one of those, newsflash, you've overcorrected. The antidote to a serious face is not to do a little small wave and an over-exaggerated smile and make yourself smaller. It's just to have a soft smile. It's to still keep all your competence. Don't get rid of competence in the interest of engaging with others. It's both and that's the trick with this.
I just want to build on that because I'm smiling as you were telling that story because I was recalling something I did a couple of weeks ago. This person's going to be interviewing 3 CEOs for a big symposium, and he's this really likable, so fun, larger than life personality. And what happens is when he gets into a mode, I'm just going to call it business formal, he loses all of his natural ability to engage, and he looks robotic. So
right.
it can happen so quickly, and it's very, very subtle. He's just driving the conversation rather than being his natural connected self who's so interested in what's going on. And it's just so interesting to me because it also made me realize when I first started this work, and I'm curious on your opinion here, when I first started this work, I thought people were born with these skills. This is not something I could learn. There's no way I could learn this. So when I looked around the organization, I saw so many people that, in my opinion, had it very naturally. And what I've learned is that you can absolutely learn it. And I think it is a skill you hone like anything else. The more you practice, the better you get. What's your opinion?
Oh, absolutely. Do I think that there are some people who are it's easier for
Yeah,
them?
that's
Yes,
fair. Yeah.
yes. But can anyone do it? And I'll take it even one step further, Jeannie. I'll say to people, I think everybody has presence sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and I will say to anyone, think of that meeting where you walk out and you think, dang, I was awesome. That was great. There's this element of I felt like I knew what I was talking about, and just as importantly, there was this effortlessness about engaging with the audience, whether it's one person, whether it's on the phone, whether it's the whole conference room full of people. And when you're doing that, you are in fact demonstrating presence. You have both this competence and connection. Yeah, for all of us though, we hone it. And I think we tend to work with people in those high stakes situations or high pressure situations. We laugh. I think you coined this phrase. It's like whack-a-mole. You get rid of one thing. And I think for all of us under pressure, something crops up. We call it an adapter behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And when you recognize it, you can work on it. So how do I get rid of that? So many times it's just helping people get out of their head and into the room. So just get out of your head.
Yeah.
Where did you go? How many times have I heard you say, wait a minute, where'd you go? Where are you?
Yeah, right. The
And
other
so, yeah. So how do you just continue to hone it? Because it's polishing. That's what it is.
the other thing that I realized also getting into this work, I thought, well, if you're introverted, yeah, you're screwed. You're never going to be good at this. It's only extroverts that are good at, communicating with any kind of influence. And I couldn't have been more wrong. And thinking about all the clients that we've worked with that are both introvert and extrovert, I mean, it is so transferable. It's just understanding who is the person. It's like taking the behaviors. That's the other thing that I realized. It's not one size fits all. It's taking the behaviors and looking at those behaviors in the context of your natural style and recognizing I know so many amazing introverts that are so powerful and so influential. I mean, have you seen the same thing just in a lot of the work that you've
Absolutely.
been doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I love, and again, for any introverts who have listened, if you haven't read Quiet, I think it's a great book for you. But again, I think one of the things that happens when we're coaching introverts, the difference for me is often feels like it's about energy for them,
Mm-hmm.
that they have to feel like they're artificially having to be loud. And it's not about being loud. You can be really powerful and quiet. Now, I didn't know Maya Angelou personally. I've seen her talk, but I think about quiet presence. There was no one more powerful or engaging. You heard Maya Angelou speak. And there's that quiet sense of strong presence that came from her every time she spoke. I think about, so I think with introverts, what I will say to them often is that oftentimes they're much better at listening than the extroverts. They will listen to understand, whereas extroverts tend to talk until they find a point.
Mm-hmm.
So either way, you can have presence, and it's always within your natural style. So I do think the one thing that the introverts that we work with feel like they have to do is become someone other than themselves, and that's what we dispel them of right away. No, it's really tapping into your ability to naturally connect, to naturally listen. And how do you make sure that when you're making a suggestion or you're offering an opinion, you insert yourself into the conversation in such a way that people hear you. And it's not about volume.
Do you hear a lot of questions where people are asking you, what's the difference between charisma and presence? And describe for me how you would articulate the difference.
Charisma. Well, I think we both read the book, The Charisma Myth.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was really powerful. And that story at the beginning of Marilyn Monroe, who could turn that literally off and on like a switch. Could now I'm Norma Ray, and nobody will notice me. And look, now I'm Marilyn Monroe, and everybody magnetically is attracted to that. I think charisma is this magnetism, this natural magnetic quality that allows people to feel you in a room, to be drawn to you. And do you need charisma? No, you don't need charisma to have presence. Do people who have natural charisma have an edge in this? Yes, as long as it feels like it's not just about them. It's about being able to show up in such a way that you're allowing others to feel heard and supported by you. I believe that with presence, it is being able to look at those. When I'm at my best, I am really listening with the audience in mind. I am engaging. I'm paying attention to what's going on with the room, not just what's going on in my head. And I think that's the biggest difference, Jeannie, with presence. It's that when you're out of your head, when you're truly focused 100% on what's going on with the other person across from you, they feel the difference. They feel the difference immediately. Then, I'm listening I'm listening to you with figuring out what I'm going to say next. That I'm not completely in the game. We talk about the bottom line. We talk about the fact that in order to have presence, you have to be present. You have to be fully in. And if you're not fully in the conversation or fully in the room or fully on the call, people can tell that you're not there.
I think the other interesting thing, and again, we see this a lot, in that we will listen until we think we've heard what we needed to hear, which then we start preparing our response. And what people don't realize is while you're doing that, if I'm in front of you, I know you're doing it. I can actually see the moment in which you're checking out, which is, again, going back to how impactful the coaching element is to be able to be another set of eyes to call out what's going on. You've just clicked over. You're now in your head. And I think it's also an interesting observation when you are in situations where I'll say are more adversarial and your ego gets hooked. Or you're just having an emotional reaction to what's going on. The same thing happens.
Amygdala hijack.
You no longer are in your place of executive thinking mind, logical, reasonable. You're not there. You're in judgment mode, protective mode. Again, same thing happens is there is a shift in sort of your energy and your way of being present in that conversation, which I think is really, really important. And again, it's so easy for us to talk about. We all know that we're all human beings and we're very complex. This is hard. That's hard to do. But if you've got some consciousness to what happens to you in those moments when you're being pushed, you'll have a greater opportunity to recognize, I've just mentally checked out. I now need to get back into the conversation. How do I do that? How do I get back in so that I'm not in judgment projection mode, but that I'm focused on what the person is saying and how they're saying it, and that I can get back to a place where I can have a solution at the end of our interaction.
Right. At the heart of this, that just taps into that whole fight or flight mechanism. When we're really pushed, we tend to either want to go, oh, no, you didn't,
Yep.
just go after you, or we shut down. And either way, and that's where this gets really tricky. You know, at the start, when for anybody who's listening about this, where it starts with is just this notion of, you know, I'll give you a couple of examples. You know, from a competence perspective, how do I make sure that I have a strong voice? I talk in shorter sentences. I pause because people process in the pauses. And at the same time, I use a more conversational tone because that is connection. I ask more questions. I have warmth in my face so that I don't scare people away. So it feels very behavioral at the surface. Underneath it, what's really going on is how do I, by virtue of how I show up, how do I build social capital that allows people to be willing to be influenced by me very quickly? How do we size up? People size up in the first 5 seconds, friend or foe. You know, do I trust you? Do I not trust you? And so underneath all that, when you talk about getting triggered, when you talk about, that's where when I get screwed up now around this, it's when my ego gets hooked. And anytime my ego gets hooked, I want to prove. I want to prove that I'm right.
I want to win.
I want to win. And so the minute that I get there, I am all about competence and all of that. You know, it's not behaviors anymore. This is a mindset. So we'll work with people on behaviors first, but the truth is, this is about the mindset of being able to show up with truly a balance of I'm interested in I'm as focused on the relationship as I am on the outcome.
You know, I was also wondering, just so many public figures out there that I so admire their ability to balance this connection and competence in such a powerful way. Like you feel them. Like I think of Robin Roberts from Good Morning America. She's got the goods. When you are watching television, who do you think has the goods?
There's a lot of people that I think have the goods. So I'll use everyone talks about Oprah. And I think for good reason, for good cause, because there is that natural warmth, that natural ability for her to engage, her natural enthusiasm comes out, and her ability to drive conversation. To do a little bit more controversial one, I wanted to Rachel Maddow from MSNBC.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think Rachel, now you don't have to love her politics, but there is no doubt that she is brilliant and smart. How she balances that is with that sense of humor. So even as she's going after people, even if she's doing some controversial opinions, she tends to do it with enough lightness and humor that it doesn't come across as arrogant or condescending from my point of view. I think she's a really great one. From a business model, I think if you've ever seen Mark Benioff, who is the CEO of Salesforce.com, he does that Dreamforce huge conference in San Francisco every year. And he's on stage for a very long piece of this. And he's interviewing leaders. There is a sense to me where he comes across is, to me, there is that authentic piece about being mission driven, not just about the profit about this. You can tell when people are there truly because this is not about them just making more money. It feels as if they're there for good cause and right reason, and they're looking to truly continue to further the conversation. I think he's a great example of somebody in the business world.
You remind me of Richard Branson, too. Whenever I've seen him speak, he has such compassion and love of humanity and intelligence. He's such a deep respect, but he
doesn't mind poking fun at himself.
No,
you have to love that.
And he has a hammer. He's not afraid to make decisions and push the envelope on various things. So I'm also wondering, it's a question I've never asked you. Who would be a public figure that you would love to do some coaching with?
Oh, that I'd love to do coaching with. Well, I would have loved to have done coaching with Hillary before the last election.
Oh, yeah. Oh my
I would,
goodness.
and so, and that is one of the things that I think about, particularly if there's women watching this. She gets in that whole narrower band, no doubt that she's
Mm-hmm.
capable and smart. And that the problem is, she's so high on the competence and look at all the weight that was on her for the election and for the primaries and for everything else. So she tended to so overcorrect on the competence side, really lean on the fact. And yet when she tried to do connection, it came across as false. It came across as inauthentic. And for anybody who remembers, not this election, the previous election, the previous primary where Obama won the nomination, was she had a moment where, I think it was during the New Hampshire primary, where she broke down after the primary, which should have been political suicide, but she cried and said, "This is so important to me, and this matters so much." And instead, what people did at that moment was they realized, oh my gosh, that was such a truly personal, authentic moment that people said, "I see a crack in the armor. She's real," and responded really positively. And there was a funny story I heard after that. Her handlers saying something to the effect of, "Oh, we need to create more authentic moments like that." And I thought, create authentic moments you have. So I would have loved to work with her to be able to say, how do you, because I've heard that in very small groups, she was lovely and warm and approachable, but that didn't show up on a national stage.
Mm. Yeah, boy, could she have used some of
Mm-hmm.
your Amy sauce. Um, one of the things that I get asked a lot too is like, what do I practice?
Right.
Where are the things that I am always focused on getting better on? And Amy and I obviously do a lot of this work where we're videotaping. I videotape myself, particularly my voice when I get stressed or angry. That's usually my number one. I might get a little too loud. But for me, I have to manage my facial reactions. I have certain triggers, certain behaviors that all of a sudden you can see it written all over my face that I have made a judgment and I'm no longer in a place of influence. So I know I have to watch that. What do you practice?
I have to watch energy. For me, it's a big energy game. And so the difference for a lot of people between being, it's fine, and really at your best, really landing in what we call that peak performance zone is energy. And so I have to manage energy so I don't come across as, I tend to still want to go business formal sometimes. And I'll
Hmm.
tend to want to go, so it'll show up in my voice. "Oh, Jeannie, very nice to meet you today." And it just feels very neutral. I go monotone. I start getting in my head about wanting to be appropriate. I want to second guess how much am I putting out there. So I really have to figure out ways for me to manage my energy more consistently so that I don't come across as flat or monotone when I'm intimidated or in stressful situations.
Mm. You have a great expression that I'll often remember when I'm getting in my head and I'm focused on my quote unquote presentation or the job that I have to do, which, hey, I'm a human being like everybody else. Sometimes
Hmm.
I have days where I'm like, oh boy, if I can recall this expression, this works for me almost every time, which is being interested instead of interesting.
Yep. Yep.
Is if you can remember to click over to being audience centric and making
Hmm.
sure they realize you're just simply an instrument of learning and that you will take the experience in the room and create whatever you need to. It isn't necessarily about you pushing data and facts and figures and things on them, but if you're staying in more of a conversational mode, for me, for Jeannie, that's what will naturally bring out my best. So I often lean on that expression. I
Right. Oh, and it shows up so fast. I'm recalling, God, years ago, Jeannie, you might have been there with me, working with a guy who was pretty high strung in a big financial services role. And when he went into stress mode, it was so much about I've got to hit the check mark. And so he would start this conversation and be like, "Yeah, how you doing?" And I wouldn't even be fine. "Yeah, okay, great." I'm like, "Wait a minute, stop." I'll call him Bill, right? It's like, wait, stop. And I go, stop. This is not going to go well. What do you mean it's not going to go well? I go, you have no interest other than getting through your agenda. You asked me how I'm doing just so you could go check. I asked that question. I really don't give a crap if you answered it or how you answered it. Like, back up, like, oh, yeah. I go, and he would also walk in and I go, okay, let's play this. You've got to go into your boss. And he'd walk in there, I go, stop, this conversation is going to suck. How did you know? Because it's written all over your face. So that whole notion of being able, get out of your head. Do you want this? Do you want to engage in a conversation with me? Or because if you don't, just send me an email.
Right.
Save yourself some time
true.
and save yourself some pain. Because unless this is a conversation, and if it's a monologue, I don't need to be here. You don't need to be here.
So funny. It also reminds me of that expression is powerful people take up time and space. They're not in a rush.
Right.
They're totally with you. And we all can recall those people that when you're in their presence, they are with you. Mm-hmm. They are tracking you. And so, it ties so beautifully into the whole influence conversation.
Yep.
I would love to transition to the final part of our conversation, which are asking you some questions.
Sure.
These are questions that I ask all my guests as a way to reveal more about your personal story. Amy, what brings you joy?
Well, first, it is the sea. It is the ocean. I was yesterday morning, I told you I was down in Monterey, and I'm lucky enough to live on the West Coast. I am close enough to run over to the ocean on a regular basis. And instead of going to the gym in the morning, I got up and I walked, I want to say probably 4 miles along the ocean. And I was beaming. Every part about my fiber I respond to the sea, I respond to the ocean, I respond to water. That is my happy place. So anytime I can be on water, that is joyful. I mean, truly, I can see and feel the difference in my energy, in my groundedness. That's number one. Number two, music brings me joy. And number three, of course, family and friends and laughter. Every once in a while, that whole thing, I'll ask people, when was the last time you just laughed so hard you cried? Mm-hmm. You need to be around people who can do that for you, because that's endorphins, that's serotonin, that's fun, that's family for me and friends.
Totally agree. What frustrates you?
What frustrates me is my lack of patience. So for myself, we're all works in progress, right? And so I'll get frustrated about my own lack of patience around things that my family will joke. They'll say, Mom, patience is, and I'll say, overrated, clearly, And so other people don't frustrate me as much as I probably frustrate myself more.
What scares you and how do you handle fear?
What scares me and how do I handle fear? You've asked me this before, Jeannie, and there's very few things that scare me anymore. I think if you look at that, I think there is a piece of that I feel like if I'm not contributing, if I'm not making a difference in the world, although right now I got to say what scares the crap out of me is what's going on with the environment. Honestly, I look at the state of the world right now and I'm thinking fires in the Amazon and global warming and the things that are just so big and feel so monumental truly can be terrifying. And then how do I manage that? I think about what can I do in just my portion of the world to try and make a difference? How do I not let that overwhelm me? How do I contribute to causes that look to save the rainforest? How do I have a son who is studying marine biology. How do we get rid of plastic? How do we? So that's the sort of stuff. Honestly, it's the big stuff. The little stuff doesn't scare me, but the big stuff around the state of the world, and that can put me into a mode of feeling paralyzed. And the antidote to that is taking action, controlling what you can.
And who do you want to meet, or live or dead, and why?
All right. So I always think about the geniuses from my back mind. So if I go back to what I have loved to have met and just see how the mind of somebody like Leonardo da Vinci works, yeah, absolutely. But I'll give you one that I think is, I have a soft spot for rule breakers. So right now, the one who I think is just a phenomenal kick-ass rule breaker is Jamila Jamil, who is from the show The Good Place. And she is, if you've never seen her, she's become very outspoken on body shaming and weight and being a strong woman, and is just a disruptor to the industry. So I admire anybody who tends to be a rule breaker, who tends to be able to speak their mind in an industry that wants you to conform.
Could not agree more. I love it. Last question. What's a daily practice that keeps you grounded and focused?
Gratitude, I think, first and foremost. I think more than anything else, that notion of being grateful for the life I've been given and the opportunities that I have and have taken advantage of. And the other thing for me is clearly around exercise movement. How do I, wherever it happens to be, get up and just do something that allows me to get the blood moving? That, particularly if I have a big day, the getting up first thing in the morning and doing something, whether it's walking on the ocean or going to the gym and working out, is really important from an energy and from a mind clarity perspective.
Well, Amy, I cannot thank you enough for being so generous with your time. All of these tips, tricks, all of the perspective you've given us on all of the presence models and all these great, great stories. It's been such a pleasure having you here. How can my listeners find you?
Well, thank you. They can find me on LinkedIn, Amy Gonzales, and I do work with Women Unlimited, so I think that shows up first in my LinkedIn bio, as well as my own company, AG Leadership. My email is amy@agleadership.net, and I love to have this conversation with anyone. So if you have a question about it, if you have a comment, love to continue the discussion.
Well, to all my listeners out there, Amy is extraordinary when it comes to the subject of presence, and her ability to coach and name behaviors that make somebody successful and where they need to shift is something like I have never seen.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you again, Amy, and looking forward to hearing feedback from all the listeners on how they're using these skills to enhance their presence. Thanks to everybody for listening to another episode of Warriors at Work and letting us be a part of your warrior journey. You can ask questions and make suggestions for future topics at jc@jeanniecoomber.com. Connect with me personally on LinkedIn and Instagram, and join us on the Warrior Conversations channel on YouTube and at the Warrior Magic Community page on Facebook. You can find links to all these places on my website, jeanniecoomber.com. And most importantly, be sure to tell friends about us, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes, Spreaker, and Spotify. It helps others find the show and puts more warrior magic out into the world.